welcome back to the show. Today I want to share some thoughts with you on the subject of there are no little guys, and might I add, no little ladies either. The theme today is that sometimes I think the public in general think that you have to have a title or you have to have a big name in order to do some great things in life, and it's often assumed, I think with some people, that the big fish are there because they're more important than anybody else. And I think true big fish, of course I use that term in quotes, understand that they're not there because of their efforts alone, just like these shows. These shows could not have been put together if it wasn't for other people. Now there's a lot of examples of people who have, by some standards, thankless jobs, or maybe they're in professions or job titles that don't get a lot of attention, because you see a lot of attention of people in the movies or athletes or people that you see on the news or TV or something. But then there are other people that I think are undervalued by what they do. Let me share several examples of some of those people. I think a big category are teachers. They're not valued very much. They're, I think, underpaid, generally speaking. And they're not considered as people that are very valuable. When I think you and I both can remember teachers in our own lives that we still remember. We still can recall teachers who have inspired us over the time. How about a truck driver? I know I get really impatient when I'm behind a truck. I can't see around the truck, or the truck's going really slow, or they're really getting in the way. But really, if you stop and think about it, if it wasn't for the truck drivers, then goods and services would not get to their locations for us to purchase, to continue on with our lives. Another example of people that have titles that are not very valued sometimes are police officers. How many times in the news have you seen in the last several years how police officers maybe are not appreciated as much as they need to be? Or maybe you think that, or not you, but maybe some people think that we could do away with law enforcement. And they're the first people that we call when we need help, is law enforcement. How about a farmer? Those people who live in the city or who were raised in urban areas, I think sometimes don't even think where their food comes from. So they don't consider the value of people like farmers. We live in a rural area in the woods, and there's farms all around us. So we understand how product gets to market for us to purchase those items in grocery stores and other places. So sometimes those titles, those professions, aren't viewed as very valuable. Again, the big picture today is there are no little guys and there are no little ladies. How about a janitor? We think, well, in some institutions, whether it's schools or in your workplace or wherever, the janitors are sometimes one of the lowest paid employees in a company. But you take away the janitor, and what do you have? You have a mess. You have problems. You have trash. You have dust. You have dirt. You have grime. So their role is critical. I've read several stories where some CEOs, whenever they walk past a janitor, they always say thank you. Because if it wasn't for the janitor, then the place would not look very well. How about somebody who's in childcare? They take care of your children, or they take care of your neighbor's children. Very low pay, not a whole lot of job satisfaction sometimes. But sometimes if it wasn't for these people, then you wouldn't be able to have a career. You wouldn't be able to earn income because those people would not have positions. Finally, this last category I want to share before I move on is a 911 dispatcher. Imagine if we didn't have 911 dispatchers around, and then when you called for help, there would be nobody there to send the police or the fire department or an ambulance. Most of you know, if you've watched the shows long enough, that I read a lot. I have maybe 300 or 400 books in my library, both at the office and at home combined. And one of the greatest books I've ever read is a book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. Again, Jim Collins' book called Good to Great. And in that book, he shares an example. I want to read that and share that story with you. He says, the fox is a cunning creature, able to devise a myriad of complex strategies for sneak attacks upon the hedgehog. Day in and day out, the fox circles around the hedgehog's den, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. Again, this is from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. Fast and sleek and beautiful and fleet of foot and crafty, the fox looks like the sure winner. The hedgehog, on the other hand, he's kind of slow, looking like a genetic mix-up between a porcupine and a small armadillo, Jim Collins writes. He waddles along, going about his simple days, searching for lunch and taking care of his own home, and the fox waits in cunning silence. At the juncture in the trail, the hedgehog, minding his own business, wanders right into the path of the fox. Aha, I've got you now, thinks the fox. He leaps out and bounding across the ground, lightning fast, the little hedgehog, sensing danger, looks up and thinks, here we go again. Will he ever learn? Rolling up into a perfect little ball, the hedgehog becomes a sphere of sharp spikes pointing outward in all directions. The fox, you see, bounding toward his prey, sees the hedgehog's defense and calls off the attack. Retreating back into the forest, the fox begins to calculate a new line of attack. Each day, some version of this battle between the hedgehog and the fox takes place, and despite the greater cunning of the fox, the hedgehog always wins. Berlin extrapolated from his little parade to divide people into two basic groups, this other scientist actually, named Berlin. Foxes pursue many ends at the same time and see the world in all its complexity. They're scattered or diffused, moving on many levels, never really integrating their thinking into one concept. So hedgehogs, he says, he ends this little piece. He says, hedgehogs, on the other hand, simplify a complex world into a single organizing everything. So in other words, the fox didn't understand the strengths of the hedgehog. And the hedgehog kind of got, in this story, of course, that's a silly story, but the hedgehog kind of got upset at the silliness of the fox. I think really true big guys, true big people, true leaders, true people who know that they can't get to the top without other people. I've said it over and over and over again. If anybody thinks I'm anything in life, which that's a matter of opinion, I've stood on the shoulders of other people. And I think same with you, that if you really define where you are and or where you could be, the only way you're going to get there is to stand on the shoulders of other people who've been there and done that. There's a great story in the Bible about Paul. Paul used to be a guy who hated this new religion called Christianity. But Paul, and I'm not going to get to it's a long, long story about Paul, but he also was a student of somebody else. That guy's name was Gamaliel. He was a student of this guy. And then also as Paul, he kind of got better in his skill sets, he learned more and more about what he was going to teach this new group of people that he was to lead. Then he mentored other people around him. One guy's name that comes to mind is Timothy. Timothy was a student of Paul. He was younger than Paul and kind of intimidated about his youth because, in that time, in that culture, the older people seemed to have all of the knowledge and the intelligence. So Paul encouraged Timothy at least once, sometimes more than once, to not devalue your youth. Don't let other people put you down because you're so young. So we see sometimes over and over again that your youth and your inexperience does not have to slow you down. It doesn't have to stop you. In fact, it should not intimidate you at all. David Branker writes, "To do nothing in the middle is to create more weight for the leader to move." I'll explain that in a second. For some leaders, it might even feel like dead weight. He says, leaders in the middle can have a profound effect on an organization. What I'm saying to you today, I guess in a long way, and I'm going to borrow a title that Mark Sanborn wrote a book, says that you don't need a title to be a leader. You don't need to be the lady or the gentleman at the top of a pyramid, in quotes, or a company, or a team, or an institution to make a difference. I can remember when Ray Lewis played on the Baltimore Raven football team. He wasn't the coach, but he had such an impact on that team, a dramatic impact on the encouragement and the inspiration of that team. And he still today goes around to give speeches and shares stories and inspires people, because he knew at the time that he wasn't the guy at the top. He was just another player, a good player, I might say. But he knew that he had an impact on his teammates. And I think if you and I think about it long enough, we can have the same kind of impact on our teams, whether it's in our family, whether if it's maybe in our workplace, maybe it's in our extracurricular activities. We can have a similar kind of impact on people all around us. Without Paul's influence, Paul, we're talking about the guy in the New Testament, Paul, who we talked about moments ago, that we would not be talking about him some 2,000 years later. Again, Paul came from a situation where he was religious. He was very confident of his upbringing. He was very confident of his family tree. He was very confident in his religion. He was very confident in his employment role. But there came a day when he was challenged, I'll be polite in how I describe it. He was challenged to look at things a little differently, and therefore that impacted his life for the rest of his life. There's a gentleman in the Old Testament of the Bible in the book of Amos, A-M-O-S. And in Amos chapter 7, right around verse 14, Amos was challenged to do some great things in his time. We're talking, again, a few thousand years ago. But he described himself as just a herdsman and a tender of sycamore fruit. That is, he took care of some trees and took care of some animals. So his role, he didn't think that he had any influence or could have any influence at all at any time, because he was just this. He was just, a herder of animals, or one who takes care of sheep or other animals or goats, or in this situation. So I think sometimes you and I look at ourselves in the mirror, and I know I do consistently, unfortunately, that we look in the mirror and we kind of say, can we have any sort of impact on the world because we don't have maybe 10 degrees behind our name, or PhD in anything, or maybe we don't have a certain title, we're not a CEO, we're not a president of a multi-billion-dollar organization. But I found in my world, in my life, in the relationships that I've had, that the majority of people who really have an impact on the world really have no title at all. They have no name over their door, or they have no badge that they wear, that they're somebody important. They just maximize every single day in order to impact people in a very special way. Over in the book of John in the New Testament, we heard that there was a story where Jesus was trying to get across to his followers that leadership is really all about serving other people. In fact, they tried, at least a couple of the guys, sometime in their relationship, that they wanted to have everything that Jesus had, but didn't want to go through everything that Jesus was going to go through. And I think sometimes, in fact, I don't think, I know, there are people who do not want to pay the price to get to places where other people have reached. Meaning that they don't have the tenacity, they don't have the willpower, they don't have the oomph, for the lack of a better term. They don't have the desire, they don't have the work ethic to do the things that people who have achieved great things do. They don't get up early, they don't stay up late, they don't work most of the time to impact other people around them. In the Old Testament, there's a story about Jeremiah, and Jeremiah was a very young man, and he, again, among others that were in the Old Testament, were challenged to speak up and do some pretty extraordinary things. So one of Jeremiah's excuses, among a few, was that he was too young. There was a time when I thought, that I had to be a certain age before anything great could ever happen, that I could create certain things. I had to live long enough, or I had to have a certain number of years of experience to do things. but I'm affiliated with people in my life that are in their 20s and doing some really incredible things because they have taken the limitations off their own mindset of what they can do. So eventually Jeremiah, he took the limitations off of what he thought that was possible. And again, I go back to that mindset that you have to reframe what you think is possible. Because if you consistently put yourself, and I consistently put myself in this box, whatever that box is, then we're never ever going to experience the potential that's out there for people who've taken the limitations off of themselves. So we go back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah is mentioned at least dozens of times, maybe more than dozens of times in a part of the scriptures. But there's also a guy named Abed-Melech. Abed-Melech was, a really, didn't have a title at all. But he shared a little bit of wisdom that eventually saved Jeremiah's life. And again, I go back to what I said in the beginning, that there are certain people, certain jobs, who really are underpaid and devalued by some in society. But without them, society would in time fall apart. So even though that you don't maybe get a lot of praise, or you don't get a lot of awards, if any, or maybe you don't have a lot of recognition, if any, it doesn't mean that your job is not important. So this guy, Abed-Melech, spoke wisdom to Jeremiah and said, why don't you try this and why don't you try that? Because if you do, then some good things could potentially happen. I read a story some years back and about, if you're old enough, you can remember what happened on September 11th, 2001. So let me share this story. The week before September 11th, 2001, America's Tuesday of Terror, 32-year-old Todd Beamer and his wife, Lisa, had spent a romantic getaway in Italy. The couple, both 1991 graduates of Wheaton College, returned home Monday, rested and relieved to be reunited with their boys, David, 3, and Andrew, 1. But extended family time would have to wait. The next morning, Todd, an executive with Oracle, had to be at a sales reps meeting in Northern California. He kissed Lisa, who was 5 months pregnant with their third child, goodbye and headed to Newark, New Jersey airport, where he boarded United Flight 93 for San Francisco. About 90 minutes into the westbound flight, the Boeing 757 was approaching Cleveland when 3 hijackers on board identified themselves to the 34 passengers and crew and proceeded to take control of the cockpit and cabin. The plane, now piloted by the world who would-be terrorists, made a sharp turn south. Todd reached for the GTE airphone in the back of one of the seats and was connected to a GTE supervisor on the ground. He explained to her what was happening and indicated that he and other passengers would not likely survive. Imagine this for yourself. He presumed the pilot and co-pilot were already seriously injured or dead. The GTE employee explained to Todd what had already happened at the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Upon hearing this news, Todd must have realized the hijackers were intent on crashing the plane into another prominent building near Washington, D.C., and they were headed there at that time. Even though the hijacker nearest to Todd had a bomb belted around his middle, the former Wheaton College baseball player told the GTE representatives that he and a few others were determined to do whatever they could to disrupt the terrorist plan. He then asked the person on the other end of the phone to call his wife and report the entire conversation to her, including how much he loved her. Before hanging up, this committed Christian and devoted family man who taught Sunday school each week asked the GTE employee to pray the Lord's Prayer with him. With the sound of passengers screaming in the background, she complied. When they concluded the prayer, Scott calmly said, "Help me, God, help me, Jesus." The GTE employee then heard Todd say, apparently to the other 3 businessmen he'd alluded to earlier, "Are you ready, guys? Let's roll." With that, the phone went dead. Within a few minutes, Flight 93 was nosediving into a rural field 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, where it left a crater 40 feet deep as it disintegrated upon impact. By the way, I saw that crater some years back myself. Because Todd Beamer was a committed Christian, he was willing to do whatever was necessary to put the needs of others above his own fear of danger and imminent death. Thanks to him and 3 other businessmen who joined with him, the intended target in the nation's capital was not reached. According to Todd's wife, Lisa, his example of courage has given me, the boys, and her unborn baby at the time, a reason to live. That was shared in the Chicago Tribune back in 2001. Courage is needed to really, I think, comfort those who are going through some very difficult times. I go back to what I said in the beginning. There's really no little guys, no little ladies, no little boys, no little girls who can really impact the world, because you can be a big person if you decide to take on the world and do some very dramatic things in your life. You know, it's not always what we do that's important, but it's how we do it. I know you and I both might struggle with sometimes things come out the wrong way. Sometimes we don't think about things too much, how we say things or how we want to get things across. But if we think about it in a very logical way, everything you say, everything you do, and how you do it impacts more people than you can imagine. In fact, I believe, this is, again, just from my own experience, that sometimes you can't see the impact of what you do and how you do it for sometimes many, many years. And as a result of what you do and how you do it, you could potentially be the only one who can impact people that in a way that only you can impact the people, meaning that there are some people that will only listen to what you say or how you say it or what you do. They will only recognize you when they're around people all day long. But there's something about you, there's something about what you do that turns that light bulb on in somebody's life that can turn them around in such a dramatic way. This happens all the time. But some of us live in this fear that we have to have all this stuff together, when in fact you just have to have enough love in your heart to continuously step out of that comfort zone and do something for people that more times than not have no way of paying you back. Again, there's no little people out there at all. There's a story about in the book of Acts, which is a New Testament book, in chapter 8. It talks about Philip. And Philip was a relatively regular guy, but he was challenged to do some great things. He was challenged to step up and do the extraordinary. And I think sometimes you and I are tempted to think that even though we may or may not have certain experiences, that we can't leverage that experience for the benefit of other people. I can tell you in my own life, there have been times when I thought that because I come from this side of the tracks, that I can't impact the people on this side of the tracks, or because I don't have certain things lined up in my life, that I can't impact people who have, all their ducks in a row and everything seems to be perfect in their own lives. I can tell you flat out that the people I've seen, I've been in thousands of people's homes in 28, 29 years in my career, that very few people really have it all together. I mean, really, they come across sometimes as having everything all together, but in reality, they really don't. John Maxwell wrote a book some years back called The 360-Degree Leader, and he shares some advice. Let me share a couple of his words of wisdom. He said that we need to lead up. He says, influence the boss and others higher in your hierarchy. And we all have a hierarchy in our lives, whether it's in our family, whether it's at work, whether it's in our social events. We all have a hierarchy in some level. So you can lead up. He says that you can lead across. He says that you can influence coworkers in your organization and associates, meaning that you can be the bridge between people right around you by how you do things, what you say, how you carry yourself, what atmosphere you create around you. He says also you can lead down. You can influence subordinates that are maybe lower in the hierarchy. Like I said about 20 minutes ago, there are CEOs who go around thanking janitors who are not at the same pay scale as the CEO, but the CEOs understand that without the janitors, the whole building would be in bad shape. So there's no little people, is what I'm trying to get across to you here today. And then John Maxwell then says, he says that we need to lead out. He says, influence those who do not even work for your agency, who do not work for your team, who maybe aren't directly influenced by you, but you can influence them in a pretty dramatic way. So as I close here today, you and I have a very important role to break out of our mold, to understand that there is no big I and little you, because if you stop and think about it, and again, this can only be understood if you've seen what I've seen, and that is that people, even with the biggest title, have issues. I know people that have huge titles, making millions of dollars a year, but they also have personal problems. Very few people are exempt from personal problems. So if you're going to wait until your personal problems are over, or you have everything completely straightened out, you're never going to really do great things in your life. So what I'm asking you today is to leverage your experiences, leverage your pain, leverage all the struggles you've gone through for the benefit of other people, and then you will see a life that you cannot possibly imagine. It'll blow your mind. My name's John Carver, and I thank you so much for watching.